Nothing is so hateful to wisdom as an excess of cleverness. Seneca. At Paris, just after dark one gusty evening in the autumn, I was enjoying the twofold luxury of meditation and a meerschaum, in company with my friend C. Augustus Dupont, in his little back library, or book closet, a Troisième, number 33 Rue Dunant, Faubourg, Saint Germain. For 1 hour at least we had maintained a profound silence, which, while each to any casual observer might have seemed intently and exclusively occupied with the curling eddies of smoke that oppressed the atmosphere of the chamber. For myself, however, I was mentally discussing certain topics which had formed matter for conversation between us in an earlier period of the evening. I mean the affair of the Rue Morgue and the mystery attending the murder of Marie Roget. I looked upon it, therefore, as something of a coincidence when the door of our apartment was thrown open and admitted our old acquaintance, Monsieur G., the prefect of Parisian police. We gave him a hearty welcome, for there was nearly half as much of the entertaining as of the contemptible about the man, and we had not seen him for several years. We had been sitting in the dark, and Dupont now arose for the purpose of lighting a lamp, but sat down again without doing so, upon G's saying that he had called to consult us, or rather to ask the opinion of my friend about some official business which had occasioned to a great deal of trouble. If it is any point requiring reflection, observed Dupont, as he forbore to enkindle the wick, we shall examine it to better purpose in the dark. That is another of your odd notions, said the prefect, who had the fashion of calling everything odd, that was beyond his comprehension, and thus lived amid an absolute legion of oddities. Very true, said Dupont as he supplied the visitor with a pipe and rolled toward him a comfortable chair. And what is the difficulty now? I asked. Nothing is more in the assassination way, I hope? Oh no, nothing of that nature. The fact is, the business is very simple indeed, and I make no doubt that we shall manage it sufficiently well ourselves. But then I thought, Dupont, would like to hear the details of it, because it is so excessively odd. Simple and odd, said Dupont. Why, yes, not that exactly that either. The fact is, we have all been a good deal puzzled because the affair is so simple, and yet baffles us altogether. Perhaps it is the very simplicity of the thing which puts you at fault, said my friend. What nonsense you do talk, replied the prefect, laughing heartily. Perhaps the mystery is a little too plain, said Dupont. Oh, good heavens, who ever heard of such an idea? A little too self-evident. Ha 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 ha! Ho ho ho! Roared our visitor, profoundly amused. Oh, Dupont, you will be the death of me yet. And what, after all, is the matter on hand? I asked. Well, I will tell you, replied the prefect as he gave a long, steady, and contemplative puff and settled himself in the chair. I will tell you in a few words, but before I begin, let me caution you that it is an affair demanding the greatest secrecy, and that I should most probably lose the position I now hold, were it known that I confided it to anyone. Proceed, said I. Or not, said Dupont. Well, then, I have received personal information from a very high quarter that is a certain document of the last importance that has been purloined from the royal apartments. The individual who purloined it is known. This beyond a doubt. He was seen to take it. It is known also that it still remains in his possession. How is this known? Asked Dupont. It is clearly inferred, replied the prefect, from the nature of your document, and from non-appearance of certain results which would at once arise from its passing out of the robber's possession, that is to say, from his employing it as he must design it in the end to employ it. Be a little more explicit, I said. Well, I may venture so far as to say that the paper gives its holder a certain power in a certain quarter, where such power is immensely valuable. The prefect was fond of the cant of diplomacy. Still, I do not quite understand, said Dupont. No? Well, the disclosure of the document is to a third person who shall be nameless. Would bring in question the honor of a personage of most exalted station. And this prefect, this fact, gives the holder of the document an ascendancy over the illustrious personage whose honor and peace are so jeopardized. But this ascendancy, I interposed, would depend upon the robber's knowledge of the loser's knowledge of the robber. Who would dare? The thief, said G, is the minister D, who dares all things, not those unbecoming as well as those of becoming a man. The method of the theft was not less ingenious than bold. The document in question, a letter, to be frank, had been received by the personage while robbed while alone in the royal boudoir. During its perusal, she was suddenly interrupted by the entrance of the other exalted personage, from whom especially it was her wish to conceal it. After a hurried and vain endeavor to thrust it in a drawer, she was forced to place it, open as it was, upon a table. The address, however, was uppermost, and the contents thus unexposed, the letter escaped notice. At this juncture enters the Minister D. His lynx eye immediately perceives the paper, recognizes it the handwriting of the address. Observes the confusion of the personage addressed, and fathoms her secret. After some business transactions hurried through in his ordinary manner, he produces a letter somewhat similar to the one in question, opens it, pretends to read it, and then places it in close juxtaposition to the other. Again he converses for some 15 minutes upon the public affairs. At length, in taking leave, he also takes from the table the letter to which he has had no claim. Its rightful owner saw, but of course dared not call attention to the act, in the presence of the third personage who stood at her elbow. The minister decamped, leaving his own letter, one of no importance, upon the table. "Here, then," said Dupont to me, "you have precisely what you demand to make the ascendancy complete. The robber's knowledge of the loser's knowledge of the robber." "Yes," replied the prefect. "And the power thus attained has for some months past been wielded for political purposes to a very dangerous extent. The personage robbed is more thoroughly convinced every day of the necessity of reclaiming her letter, but this of course cannot be done openly. In fine, driven to despair, she has committed the matter to me." "Then whom," said Dupont, amid a perfect whirlwind of smoke, "no more sagacious agent could, I suppose, be desired or even imagined." "You flatter me," replied the prefect, "but it is possible that some such opinion may have been entertained." "It is clear," said I, "as you observe, that the letter is still in the possession of the minister, since it is in this possession, and not any employment of the letter, which bestows the power. With the employment the power departs." "True," said G. And upon this conviction I proceeded. My first care was to make thorough search of the minister's hotel, and here the chief embarrassment lay in the necessity of searching without his knowledge. Beyond all things, I have been warned of the danger which would result from him giving reason to suspect our design. "But," said I, "you are quite au fait in these investigations. The Parisian police have done this thing often before." "Oh, yes, and for this reason I did not despair. The habits of the minister gave me, too, a great advantage. He is frequently absent from home all night. His servants are by no means numerous. They sleep at a distance from their master's apartment, and being chiefly Neapolitans, are readily made drunk. I have keys, as you know, with which I can open any chamber or cabinet in Paris. For 3 months a night has not passed during the greater part of which I have not been engaged personally in ransacking the D Hotel. My honor is interested, and not to mention a great secret, the reward is enormous. Enormous." So I did not abandon the search until I had become fully satisfied that the thief is a more astute man than myself. I fancy that I have investigated every nook and corner of the premises in which it is possible that the paper can be concealed. "But it is not possible," I suggested, "that although the letter may be in possession of the minister, as it unquestionably is, he may have concealed it elsewhere than upon his own premises?" This is barely possible," said Dupont. "The present peculiar condition of the affairs at court, and especially of the intrigues in which D is known to be involved, would render the instant availability of the document, its susceptibility of being produced at a moment's notice, a point of nearly equal importance with its possession." "Its susceptibility of being produced," said I. "That is to say, of being destroyed," said Dupont. "True," I observed. "The paper is clearly then upon a premises. As for its being upon the person of the minister, we may consider that all as out of the question." "Entirely," said the prefect. "He has been twice waylaid as if by footpads, and his person rigidly searched under my own inspection." "You might have spared yourselves this trouble," said Dupont. "D, I presume, is not altogether a fool, and if not, must have been anticipated these waylayings as a matter of course." "Not altogether a fool," said G, "but then he's a poet, which I take to be only one removed from a fool. True, said Dupont, after a long and thoughtful whiff of his meerschaum. Although I have been guilty of certain doggerel myself. Suppose you detail, said I, the particulars of your search. Why, the fact is we took our time. And we searched everywhere. I have had long experience in these affairs. I took the entire building, room by room, devoting the nights of the whole week to them. To each. We examined first the furniture of each apartment. We opened every possible drawer, and I presume you know that, to a properly trained police agent, such a thing as a secret drawer is impossible. Any man is adult who permits a secret drawer to escape him in a search of this kind. This thing is so plain. There's a certain amount of bulk of space to be accounted for in every cabinet. Then we have accurate rules. The 50th part of the line could not escape us. After the cabinets, we took the chairs. The cushions we probed with fine long needles you have seen me employ. From tables we removed the tops. Why so? Sometimes the top of the table or a similarly arranged piece of furniture is removed by the person wishing to conceal an article. Then the leg is excavated, the article deposited within the cavity, and the top replaced. The bottoms and tops of the bedposts are employed in the same way. But could not the cavity be detected by sounding? I asked. By no means. If, when the article was deposited, a sufficient wadding of cotton be placed around it. Besides, in our case, we were obliged to proceed without noise. But you could not have removed, you could not have taken to pieces all articles of furniture in which it would have been possible to make a deposit in the manner you mentioned. A letter may be compressed into a thin spiral roll, not differing much in shape or bulk from a large knitting needle. And in this form it might be inserted in the rungs of a chair, for example. You did not take to pieces all the chairs? Certainly not, but we did better. We examined the rungs of every chair in the hotel, and indeed, the jointings of every description of furniture by the aid of a most powerful microscope. Had there been any traces of recent disturbance, we should not have failed to detect it instantly. A single grain of gimlet dust, for example, would have been as obvious as an apple. Any disorder in the gluing, any unusual gaping in the joints, would have sufficed to ensure detection. I presume you looked to the mirrors between the boards and the plates, and you probed the beds and the bedclothes, as well as the curtains and carpets. That, of course, and when we had absolutely completed every particle of the furniture in this way, then we examined the house itself. We divided its entire surface into compartments, which we numbered so that none might be missed. Then we scrutinized each individual square inch throughout the premises, including the houses immediately joined with the microscope as before. The two houses adjoining, I exclaimed. You must have had a great deal of trouble. We had, but the reward offered is prodigious. You include the grounds about the houses? All the grounds are paved with brick. They gave us comparatively little trouble. We examined the moss between the bricks and found it undisturbed. You looked among these papers, of course, and in the books of the library? Certainly, we opened every package and parcel. We not only opened every book, but we overturned every leaf in each volume, not contenting ourselves with a mere shake, according to the fashion of some of our police officers. We also measured the thickness of every book cover, and with which the most accurate in measurement, and applied at most to each the most jealous scrutiny of the microscope. Had any of the bindings been recently meddled with, it would have been utterly impossible that the fact should have escaped observation. some 5 or 6 volumes just from the hand of the binder. We carefully probed longitudinally with the needles. You explored the floors beneath the carpets? Beyond doubt. We moved every carpet and examined the boards with a microscope. And the papers on the walls? Yes. We looked into the cellars. We did. Then, I said, you have been making a miscalculation, and the letter is not upon the premises as you suppose. I fear you are right there, said the prefect. And now, Dupont, what would you advise me to do? To make a thorough research of the premises. That is absolutely needless, replied G. I am not more sure that I have breathed that I am in the letter is not at the hotel. I have no better advice to give you, said Dupont. You have, of course, an accurate description of the letter? Oh, yes, interrupted the prefect, producing a memorandum book. Proceeded to read aloud the minute account of the interval, and especially of the external appearance of the missing document. Soon after finishing the perusal of this description, he took his departure, more entirely depressed in spirits than I had ever known the good gentleman before. In about a month afterward, he paid us another visit, and I found us occupied in real nearly as before. He took a pipe and a chair and entered into some ordinary conversation. At length, I said, well, but, gee, what of the Purloined letter? I presume you have at last made up your mind that there is no such thing as an overreaching the minister. Confound him, said I. Yes, I have made the re-examination, yet, however, as Dupont suggested, but it was all labor lost, as I knew it would be. How much was the reward offered, did you say? Asked Dupont. Why, a very great deal, a very liberal reward. I do not like to say how much precisely, but one thing I will say that I wouldn't mind giving my individual check for 50,000 francs to anyone who could obtain me that letter. The fact is, it is becoming of more and more importance every day, and the reward has lately been doubled. If it were trebled, however, I could do no more than I have done. Why, yes, said Dupont, drawingly, between the whiffs of his meerschaum. I really think, G, you have not exerted yourself to the utmost in this matter. You might do a little more, I think, eh? How? In what way? Why? Puff, puff. You might, puff, puff. Employ counsel in the matter, eh? Puff, puff, puff. Do you remember the stories they tell of Abernethy? No, hang Abernethy. To be sure, hang him and welcome. But once upon a time, a certain rich miser conceived the design of sponging upon this Abernethy for a medical opinion. Getting up for this purpose in ordinary conversation in a private company, he insinuated his case to this physician as that of an ordinary individual, imaginary individual. We will suppose, said the miser, that his symptoms are such and such. Now, doctor, what would you have directed him to take? Take, said Abernethy. Why, take advice, to be sure. But, said the prefect, a little discomposed, I am perfectly willing to take advice and to pay for it. I really give 50,000 francs to anyone who would aid me in the matter. In that case, replied Dupont, opening a drawer and producing a checkbook, you may as well fill me up a check of the amount mentioned. When you have signed it, I will hand you the letter. I was astonished. The prefect appeared absolutely thunderstricken. For some minutes he remained speechless and motionless, looking incredulously at my friend with open mouth, and eyes that seemed starting from their sockets. Then, apparently recovering himself in some measure, he seized a pen and, after several pauses and vacant stares, finally filled up and signed a check for 50,000 francs and handed it over across the table to Dupont. The latter examined it carefully and deposited it in his pocketbook, and then, unlocking an escritoire, took thence a letter and gave it to the prefect. This functionary grasped it in a perfect agony of joy and opened it with a trembling hand, cast a rapid glance at its contents, and then, scrambling and struggling to the door, rushed at length unceremoniously from the room and from the house, without having uttered a syllable since Dupont had requested him to fill up the check. When he had gone, my friend entered into some explanations. The Parisian police, he said, are exceedingly able in their way. They are persevering, ingenious, cunning, and thoroughly versed in the knowledge which their duties seem chiefly to demand. Thus, when G detailed to us his mode of searching the premises at the Hotel D, I felt entire confidence in his having made a satisfactory investigation, so far as his labors extended. So far as his labors extended, said I. Yes, said Dupont. The measures adopted are not only the best of their kind, but carried out to absolute perfection. Had the letter been deposited within the range of their search, these fellows would, beyond a question, have found it. I merely laughed, but he seemed quite serious in all they said. The measures, then, he continued, were good in their kind, and well executed. Their defect lay in their being inapplicable to the case and to man. A certain set of highly ingenious resources are with the prefect, a sort of Procrustean bed, to which he forcibly adapts his designs. But he perpetually errs by being too deep or too shallow for his inventor at hand, and many a schoolboy is better reasoner than he. I knew one about 8 years of age whose success at guessing in the game of even and odd attracted universal admiration. This game is simple and is played with marbles. One player holds in his hand a number of these toys and demands on another whether that number is even or odd. If the guess is right, the guesser wins one. If wrong, he loses one. The boy to whom I allude won all the marbles of the school. Of course, he had some principle of guessing, and this lay in mere observation and a measurement of the astuteness of his opponents. For example, an arrant simpleton is his opponent, and holding up his closed hand, asked, "Are they even or odd?" Our schoolboy replies, "Odd," and loses. But upon the second trial he wins. For then he says to himself, the simpleton has made them even upon the first trial, and his amount is cunning to just sufficient to make him have them odd upon the second. I will therefore guess odd. He guesses odd and wins. Now, with the simpleton, a degree above the first, he would have reasoned thus: this fellow finds In the first instance, I guessed odd, and in the second he will propose himself upon the first impulse, a simple variation from even to odd, and even did the first simpleton. But then a second thought will suggest that this is too simple a variation, and finally he will decide upon putting it even as before. I will therefore guess even. He guesses even and wins. Now this mode of reasoning in the schoolboy, whom his fellows termed lucky, what in its last analysis is it? It is merely, I said, an identification of the reasoner's intellect with that of his opponent. It is, said Dupont. And upon his inquiring the boy by what he means, he effected the thorough identification in which his success consisted. I received the answer as follows. When I wish to find how wise or how stupid or how good or how wicked is anyone, or what his thoughts are at the moment, I fashion the expression of my face as accurately as possible in accordance with the expression of his, and then wait to see what thoughts or sentiments arise in my heart or mind. As if to match or correspond with the expression. This response of the schoolboy lies at the bottom of the spurious profundity which has been attributed to Rochefoucauld, to La Bougival, to Machiavelli, and to Campanella. And the identification, I said, of the reasoner's intellect with that of his opponent depends, if I understand you aright, upon the accuracy with which the opponent's intellect is measured. For it is practical value, it depends upon this, replied Dupont. And the prefect and his cohorts fall so frequently first by default of this identification. And secondly, by ill measurement, or rather through non-measurement of the intellect with which they are engaged. They consider only their own ideas of ingenuity, and in searching for anything hidden, advert only to the modes in which they would have hidden it. They are right in this much that their own ingenuity is a faithful representative of that of the mass. But when the cunning of the individual felon is diverse in character from their own, the felon foils them, of course. This always happens when it is above their own, and very usually when it is below. They have no variation of the principle in their investigations. At best, when urged by some unusual emergency, by some extraordinary reward, they extend or exaggerate their own modes of practice without touching their principles. What, for example, is this case of D has been done to vary their principles of action? What is all this boring and probing and sounding and scrutinizing with the microscope and dividing the surface of the building into registered square inches? What is it all but exaggeration of the application of one principle or set of principles of search, which are based upon the one set of notions regarding human ingenuity, to which the prefect in a long routine of his duty has been accustomed? Do you not see that he has taken for granted that all men are perceived with to conceal a letter, not exactly in a gimlet hole bored in a chair leg, but at least in some out of the way hole or corner suggested by the same tenor of thought which would urge a man to secrete a letter in a gimlet hole bored in a chair leg? And do you not see also that the recherches nook for concealment are adapted only for ordinary occasions and would be adopted only by ordinary intellects, for in all cases of concealment, a disposal of the article concealed, a disposal of it in its recherche manner, is in the very first instance presumable and presumed, and thus its discovery depends not at all upon acumen, but altogether upon the mere case, patience, and determination of the seekers, and where the case is of importance, or what amounts to the same thing in political eyes, when the reward is of magnitude, the qualities in question have never been known to fail. You will now understand what I mean in suggesting that had the Purloined letter had been hidden anywhere within the prefect's examination, in other words, had the principle of its concealment been comprehended within the principles of the prefect, its discovery would have been a matter altogether beyond question. This functionary, however, has been thoroughly mystified, and the remote source of his defeat lies in the supposition that the minister is a fool, because he has acquired renown as a poet. All fools are poets. This the prefect feels, that he is merely guilty of a non-distributio medi, a logical fallacy, the fallacy of this undistributed middle, in that inferring that all poets are fools. But is this really a poet? I asked. There are two brothers I know, and both have attained a reputation in letters. The minister, I believe, has written learnedly on the differential calculus. He is a mathematician and no poet. You are mistaken. I know him well. He is both. As poet and mathematician, he would reason well. As mere mathematician, he could not have reasoned at all, and thus would have been at the mercy of the prefect. You surprise me, I said, by these opinions which I had been contradicted by the voice of the world. You do not mean that to set at naught the well-digested idea of centuries, the mathematical reason that has been long been regarded as the reason par excellence? Replied Dupont, quoting from Chamfort. You can bet on the fact that any idea in convention is widely accepted is wrong, for it is simply convenient to the greater number. The mathematicians, I grant you, have done their best to promulgate the popular error to which you allude, and which is known the lesson error for its promulgation as truth. With an art worthy a better cause, for example, they have insinuated the term analysis into application to the algebra. The French are originators of this particular deception, but if a term is of any importance, if words derive any value from applicability, then analysis conveys algebra as much as in Latin. Ambitus implies ambition, religion, or honesty, a set of honorable men. You have a quarrel in hand, I see, said I, with some of the algebraists of Paris, but proceed. I dispute the availability and thus the value of that reason which is cultivated in any special form other than the abstractly logical. I dispute in particular the reason adduced by mathematical study. The mathematics are the science of form and quantity. Mathematical reasoning is merely logic applied to observation upon form and quantity. The great error lies in supposing that even the truths of what is called pure algebra are abstract or general truths, and this error is so egregious that I am confounded at the universality with which it has been received. Mathematical axioms are not axioms of great or general truth. What is true of relation of form and quantity is often grossly false in regarding to morals. For example, in this latter science, it is very usually untrue that the aggregated parts are equal to the whole. In chemistry, also the axiom fails. It's a consideration of motive it fails, for two motives, each of a given value, have not necessarily a value when united, equal to the sum of their parts of their values apart. There are numerous other mathematical truths which only truths within the limits of a relation. But the mathematician argues that it is finite truths sur habit, as if they were of absolutely general applicability. As the world indeed imagines them to be. Briand, in his very learned mythology, mentions a analogous source of error when he says that although the pagan fables are not believed, that we forget ourselves continually and make inferences from them as existing realities. With the Algerians, however, who are pagans themselves, the pagan fables are believed, and the inferences are made, not so much through lapse of memory as through an uncountable addling of the brains. In short, I never yet encountered the mere mathematician who could be trusted out of equal roots, or one who could not, did not clandestinely hold it as a point of his truth that x squared plus px was absolutely and unconditionally equal to the q. Say to unto these gentlemen, by way of experiment, if you please, that you believe that occasions may occur where x squared plus px is not altogether equal to q, and having made him understand what you mean, get out of his reach as speedily as convenient, for beyond doubt he will endeavor to knock you down. I mean to say, continued Dupont, while I merely laughed at his last observations, that if the minister has been no more than a mathematician, the prefect would have been under no necessity of giving me this check. I knew him, however, as both mathematician and poet, and my measures were adapted to his capacity, with reference to the circumstances by which he was surrounded. I knew him as courier too, and as a bold intriguant. Such a man, I considered, could not have failed to be aware of the ordinary policial modes of action. He could not have failed to anticipate, and events have proved that he did not fail to anticipate, the waylayings to which he was subjected. He must have foreseen, I reflected, the secret investigations of his premises, his frequent absences from home at night, which were hailed by the prefect as certain aids to his success, I regard only as ruses to observe opportunity through thorough search to the police. And thus, the sooner to impress them with the conviction to which G in fact did arrive, the conviction of the letter was not upon the premises. I felt also that this whole train of thought, which at some pains detailing to you just now, concerning the invariable principle of the policial action in which searches for articles concealed, I felt that this whole train of thought would necessarily pass through the mind of the minister. It would imperatively lead him to despise all the ordinary nooks of concealment. He could not, I reflected, be so weak as not to see as that the most intricate and the remote recess of his hotel would be as open as to see as common as closets to his eyes, to the probes, to the gimlets, and to the microscopes of the prefect. I saw, in fine, that he would be so driven, as a matter of course, to simplicity, if not deliberately induced to it as a matter of choice. You will remember, perhaps, how desperately the prefect laughed when I suggested, upon our first interview, that I was just as possible as that this mystery troubled him so much on account of its being so very self-evident. Yes, said I remember this merriment well. I really thought he would have fallen into convulsions.